I'm Caroline Hyde in for Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the in-house drama continues at the world's most valuable startup. Details on the plan to drive former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick further away, and why Uber's longest-running executive Ryan Graves decides it's time to step down from global ops. Plus, Snap's user growth fails to impress and revenue misses in the face of stiff competition. We'll break down today's disappointing second quarter report. And rising geopolitical tensions rattled financial markets. The worst day for U.S. stocks since May, as tensions between the U.S. and North Korea continue to escalate. We'll bring you the latest later this hour. First to our lead, drama in Uber continues to unfold. Benchmark Capital, which has a 13% stake in Uber, filed a lawsuit to remove former CEO Travis Kalanick from the board. Now, Benchmark alleges Kalanick engaged in fraud by misleading investors about his effort to pack the firm's board with allies willing to keep him as a director. Now, this after he was removed as the company's top executive, according to the suit. Now, a representative for Kalanick responded to the news saying, quote, "The lawsuit is completely without merit and riddled with lies and false allegations. This is continued evidence of Benchmark acting in its own best interests, contrary to the interests of Uber, its employees, and its other shareholders." And also breaking today, Uber's first hire and one-time CEO Ryan Graves is stepping down from his current managerial role in the company. For more, let's go to Bloomberg Technology's Brad Stone in San Francisco, who wrote about Uber in his book, The Upstarts, how the continuation of this really what has been a bitter rivalry that now seems to be a culmination point between Benchmark Capital, Bill Gurley in particular, and Travis Kalanick. Tell us about this unfolding. Does it mean that Travis will be removed from the board, do you think?
Well, we'll have to see how the lawsuit plays out, Caroline, but you're right. This is a bitter rivalry between one-time allies, Benchmark, one of the first venture capital investors in Uber, Travis Kalanick, one of the founders, one of the personal investors, and then the second CEO to lead the company to great heights, a $70 billion valuation. And really, you can look at these past couple of months in many different ways, partly as the chickens of bad management come home to roost, but also as really the complete deterioration in the relationship between Benchmark and its partner Bill Gurley, who sat on the Uber board, and Travis Kalanick. I think they fundamentally disagreed about how to run the company, when the company should go public, and now who should be the next CEO. They each own equal parts of the company. They each have pretty much equal voting power, and I think this lawsuit is, evidence that they cannot figure out a path forward.
I mean, it's amazing just thinking back to your book, The Upstarts, and where we saw Bill Gurley really driving after Uber, after Travis, wanting to get a piece of this pie. And as you say, Benchmark Capital has 13%. Could we see the 10% or thereabouts that Travis Kalanick still holds have to be distributed back to the board? I mean, that's about a $7 billion valuation on that stake.
I don't think he would lose his stake. I mean, what he is trying to hang on to is his board position, is his influence at the company. Nominally, this lawsuit is about 3 new board seats that the board authorized to be created back in June 2016, which Travis controls. Now, when he departed as CEO, which now seems like a year ago, but was just a couple of weeks ago, he apparently, according to the lawsuit, pledged that he would give up those seats. Now he occupies one of the seats, and he has never signed the documentation giving up his power to control or appoint those 2 board members. And so this is why nominally Benchmark is suing. It's saying that Travis is trying to hang on, exert control. Maybe he has designs on, as he was quoted as saying secondhand, Steve Jobsing it or boomeranging back to the company one day. What's probably true is that he's trying to find someone to fill that spot who's just as aggressive, ambitious, as hard driving as he was as Uber's CEO. And I think Benchmark has a different sort of idea. They want a more professional, perhaps less dramatic CEO. They cannot agree, and now we get this lawsuit.
Talking of CEOs, another former CEO and actually the first ever employee after Jared and the founders Travis Kalanick hired none other than Ryan Graves. He today has also said, look, I'm out of managerial roles, but I am staying on the board. Is this timing all wrapped up with the lawsuit, do you think? What's pushed him over the edge to decide he wants to stand down?
Yeah, no, I don't think it's related at all. Ryan Graves, you're right, he was the first CEO and really one of Travis's kind of right-hand executives. He was a sort of spiritual leader at Uber. He ran for many years the operations, those 500 cities, at the time, a very decentralized structure. But over the past couple of months, he has been sort of ceding control of the company. His domain has shrunk. And, frankly, I think he, was sort of feeling burnt out. So he's focused on his board responsibilities now, on finding the next CEO. I do think it's a blow for Uber because this is someone who knew the culture and who could really be a guide to that next CEO, whoever it may be. I mean, I think he still will have a role on the board, but to have an operational role, that would have been an advantage for the next CEO of Uber. So, not a good day for everyone's most dramatic $70 billion startup.
One of the key investors who himself perhaps had been slightly tarnished in his own reputation of late was Chris Sacca, and he took to Twitter, a Twitter storm we sort of saw, but notably he was talking about Ryan Graves and how he's consistently been respected by others on the board and is great at building consensus. So still important that he's on the board, but how does it go with the new CEO search? And indeed morale at the company, Brad?
Well, I mean, the new CEO search, as my colleague Eric Newcomer and others have reported, it drags on. They're down to 3 candidates. One was said to be former GE CEO Jeffrey Immelt. Meg Whitman took herself out of contention a couple of weeks ago. She was rumored to be on the short list. I think, though, they had talked about wanting to appoint someone by Labor Day. I think they're at an impasse, though. I think that there is a different vision, between Travis and his allies and then Benchmark and its allies about what kind of CEO Uber needs, and tied in with that, when should this company go public and when does it need to professionalize and perhaps take its foot off the gas a little bit. And this is a very divided board, a board with a lot of bad history now and bad feelings and now a lawsuit. And so I think, frankly, they're kind of stuck on the way forward. So my guess is it might still be weeks or months before we have a new Uber CEO. And your second question, Carolyn, about morale, it cannot be good at Uber with one thing after another. I think people have to be wishing that this drama is just behind them.
I'm sure they do. Bloomberg's Brad Stone. I know that you'll be there every step of the way along with Eric Newcomer and your team. Thank you very much indeed. Meanwhile, Microsoft and Kaspersky Lab have settled a dispute that led to antitrust complaints in Europe and an investigation in Russia. As part of the agreement, the software giant will make changes to the next update of Windows this fall. This comes 2 months after Kaspersky, a maker of antivirus software, complained to European antitrust regulators that Microsoft was favouring its own security software in the Windows operating system. Coming up, Snap misses the mark on daily active users by about 2 million. We'll dig into the company's second quarter earnings next. This is Bloomberg. Now, Snap shares are plummeting in late trading after reporting second quarter earnings. The company's growth fell short of estimates again, and feeding those fears that aggressive competition from Facebook is blunting the Snap's potential just months after its IPO. Revenue also disappointed this quarter with $181 million, missing the $185 million average estimate. Snap's earnings call just starting. We'll bring you headlines throughout the hour. But now we're joined by James Chalkmark, his analyst at Monness Crespi Hart, and Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson. I know both been digging over these numbers. I mean, shares last time I looked down about 15% overall in after-hours trading. James, talk to us about the fact that they missed. Is it the daily active users that people are worrying about? Is it the revenue? Is it the lack of monetization?
Well, here's what I'll tell you. Well, first, I agree with you that the shares are plummeting. I disagree that this is the headlines about that this being a Facebook kind of effect. I think 100% of the problems that we're seeing at Snapchat is self-inflicted. They're not doubling down on the core areas of expertise that we thought that they could capitalize on, like the content side of the picture, and they're not really educating the existing users as well as the new potential users on the new product iteration. So when you look at the metrics, to answer your question, I thought the user number was fine. I mean, it's not too far off from what the street was looking for. What the issue was on the monetization side, because you're seeing a much flatter trajectory than what would be expected at a company at this stage. And I think that's why the red flags are starting to go up.
Just looking at some of the headlines coming out, Snap saying that since the map launch, content submitted to stories are up 30%. The CEO and the co-founder both saying they're not planning to sell shares this year. Let's look, Corey, at potentially the story unfolding here. ARPU, average revenue per user, this is an all-important metric, and it's not being driven up that quickly at the moment. Is it just that we have to wait a little bit until they start to get the big ad players in and buying?
There are a lot of problems here with that revenue raiser. Look, if you look on a year-over-year basis, it's a very strong improvement, right? It nearly doubled from 50 cents to $1.05. But when you there are a lot of issues here. So the hope was they would have this big and growing platform and grow a lot of users and basically turn on the ads, go to places where they never had ads before and just dump them in. Well, that's not happening, and we can see that from those numbers. But there are a lot of reasons it's not happening. That major advertisers haven't come on in size as there were hopes that they would, and they might yet, but they haven't. But also there are some technological issues. James and I were just sitting here, and he's listening to the call, and his jaw just dropped. And they said the problems they've got with Android, which is pretty important because most phones are Android phones in the world. The problems that they've got with Android aren't going to be fixed until next year. These are self-inflicted wounds, as James so smartly said, and this company, is showing that they're having some real issues just doing the basic blocking and tackling to make their business available for the revenues that might want to come to it.
I mean, just looking at how different, though, when you are gauging potentially the stories product that was unfolded by Facebook and Instagram, that 250 million daily active users on Instagram now using that versus the 173 million that we see today from Snap. I mean, where, therefore, do you see them making any sort of inroads into the market share, particularly for the likes of mobile ad market, James? I mean, at the moment, eMarketer thinks it'll just go get 0.6% of the global pie versus 22% that Facebook has. I'm slightly shocked that you think that this isn't in any way a competition issue. Not
0.6, by the way, James, is 0.6. It's just, it's English.
It's a British thing.
Okay. No, you took the words right out of my mouth. To contextualize it, we're talking about less than 1% of the global ad budget, which is what Snapchat is trying to capture. And when you think about the fact that two companies, Facebook and Google, command 85-90% of the growth in advertising revenue, obviously advertisers and agencies want to explore a third alternative, which is what Snapchat has become. But the issue, I really think that there's too much emphasis placed on the user growth, which I think is a good number. But if they were able to get the content side of the equation, which they're armed with multi-billion dollars of cash after the IPO to spend on that kind of content, and at the same time improve on the product at a faster pace of iteration, I think you can see that ARPU number creep up at a much faster rate. And the fact that that's not happening,
Faith,
I've been in the seat 3 months ago too.
Faith is the belief in things unseen, and James has faith that these guys will be the gang that couldn't shoot straight.
James, you were one of the first analysts out there with a buy recommendation on Snap. Do you stick by that buy?
I can't tell you that now. But what I can tell you is that we have been, the way we positioned the quarter, the preview into the quarter was this is a make or break story. So the numbers are certainly not suggesting that the reignition of the growth on the monetization, but we need to understand what's being said on the call, what the outlook is. But the numbers right now don't speak too favorably for the outlook for the balance of the year.
Question marks remain. We'll let you get back to that call. James Chuckmark, analyst at Monness Crespi Hart, thank you very much for giving your time amid that investor and analyst call. But sticking with earnings, Blue Apron's given investors a sour taste after its first quarterly report as a public company. Shares of the meal kit delivery service falling the most since its June IPO after it lost customers in the second quarter. Corey, you've been poring over this one as well, and revenue did actually beat in this circumstance, but it's all about having to rein back its marketing spend and therefore reining back on the customers that use the product.
I mean, it's you know, I think when I think of marketing, whether it's Blue Apron or any other company, and marketing expense, you know, usefully we can see the effect of marketing. They don't give us all the numbers that I would like to see from Blue Apron, and most importantly, the churn rate. But what they do tell us is how many subscribers they have and how much they spent to get them, what the marketing cost was. So, you know, if think of marketing as a way to sort of drive the business, like putting the pedal on the gas. If they take the pedal off the gas, then you see how well the car rolls without the gas being hit. Well, what we saw was they took the pedal off the gas, but then the user growth fell apart. So, you know, what this shows me is that the customers of Blue Apron don't like the service enough to keep buying it without being hit in the face with marketing costs, with advertisements. Now, whether that means people stand up for a limited period of time and that every customer is a new customer, we don't know that because we don't know the average life of a customer. But what I'd love to know from Blue Apron is how long customers stay with them. And so then we can start to address whether the service works. You know, food is a great business. Restaurants are a wonderful thing when they're good. And the question for Blue Apron and what we start to see with these numbers is that maybe the users just don't want to stay with the service.
And we know how hard margins can be in the restaurant business as well, and particularly when there's perhaps an Amazon coming after to eat your lunch in your business model as well. And pardon the pun, I mean, face-off versus Amazon has always been... I went there, Corey. Amazon, they're the fierce competition that could, you know, get in and hurt even more when Blue Apron's managing to lose 9% of its customer base all on its own. I don't really see Amazon as a big competitor here. I mean, they don't really have an offering to speak of. But there are so many other companies that are doing this, whether it's Sunbasket or there's some green alternatives in this. It's an attractive idea because the revenue is so high. When you can get a user who's spending thousands of dollars a year on the service, if the business is successful, you can imagine why so many would try. But it's a tricky business, the food business, and this food delivery business also quite tricky. And I think ultimately it's going to be successful. I mean, look, eating is fun. Cooking is fun. Cooking for someone you love is even more fun. And taking some of the decision process away from that could be a very successful thing. It's why we have the Food Network on TV. It's why we have recipes in every newspaper and magazine out there. It's why we have cookbooks. To make this so much simpler using technology is a very attractive business. But Blue Apron doesn't have the mix right yet. And just taking their foot off the gas in marketing when the user numbers don't grow is a problem for this business. And a big problem if you're another company trying to go public in this space anytime soon. And HelloFresh is a European competitor that I keep a keen eye on. Bloomberg editor-at-large Corey Johnson, great to have you. Thank you for breaking all of Snap and Blue Apron down for us. Now, coming up, it's the biggest day of losses for US stocks since May. This is President Trump dialed up his warning to North Korea. We'll bring you the latest after the break. This is Bloomberg. Now to the moves we saw in the US stocks today. Amid tensions between US and North Korea, equities sold off into the close, with the benchmarks having their worst day since May. Joining us now from New York, it's Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. Not a day to be long these markets.
Oh, that's a good way to put it, Caroline. It certainly was ugly, especially into the close with the major averages, especially the NASDAQ finishing right at the lows, down more than 2%, that tech-heavy NASDAQ. Now, I did reach out to a number of street contacts to ask whether or not this pullback that we saw today was anything like the pullback that we saw back in June. If you recall, back on June 9th, we saw a big sell-off, and then tech pulled back, or the NASDAQ, I should say, pulled back about 4% from there, and then only to rally. Now, some street contacts back then were saying to buy the dip. Today, more caution, Caroline. A number of those contacts were more focused on the macro picture, not really talking about whether it has to do with tech. And in fact, Frank Capillari over at Instinet, he made the very interesting point that we now have 3 down days in a row row. And what's changed, the trading action feels a little bit more emotional, which suggests that we could see some more downside. And in fact, there are others on the street who are saying that they think that we could actually see a bit of a correction, a long overdue correction. One reason, Caroline, we break down the NASDAQ to think maybe that could happen, some of those more momentum sectors, the NASDAQ Biotech Index and also the SOX, or the the Philadelphia Semiconductor Index, those sold off far more than the NASDAQ and the NASDAQ 100. So sometimes investors consider that to be a tell on bearish action. Again, maybe reason to think that this dip today turns into something more. And as for what really dragged on the NASDAQ today, it was some of those big names, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and Microsoft. Interestingly, as is often the case on these kinds of days, Caroline, nothing new fundamentally on those companies to bring them down, but some of these stocks do have higher levels of beta, and on big up or down days, they tend to swing in a more significant way.
Talking about swinging, I want to have a quick look at what's been happening to chip makers, because if you go into the terminology #BTV, I know that you've been putting together some great charts for us. And if you type in 7430, here you have NVIDIA weighing on what is the overall benchmark for chip stocks. Talk to us about NVIDIA, because it looked as though the numbers looked all right for this chip designer, but then there's some devil in the detail.
Well, it's pretty interesting. So, Caroline, there in that chart that you're showing, in white is NVIDIA. So you see that the stock is sky high on the year, up more than 50%. So expectations going into the quarter were very, very high. As you mentioned, the numbers were good. They did beat in a pretty significant way. They put up $1 and a penny versus 82 cents, $2.23 billion versus $1.96 billion. And Anand Srinivasan, and Bloomberg Intelligence analyst, said it's a clean quarter. One small flaw could be the fact that the data center growth was a little bit disappointing. But relative to the SOX, it has been down less than NVIDIA. NVIDIA, the higher growth part of the chip sector, so that makes sense. The point that I would really like to make here, though, Caroline, Ari Wald over at Oppenheimer, technical analyst, he's very bullish. He's been very good. He made the point today that the one concern to him is the fact that the SOX did not put in a new high relative to the NASDAQ back just recently, and that could be some kind of a tell. And with NVIDIA's weakness, who knows? Maybe there's more bearish action ahead.
Thank you to Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. After hours trading in NVIDIA down 6%. Coming up, we're going to be talking Google and diversity.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. President Trump says if North Korea attacks Guam or anyone the U.S. cares about, they should be nervous. The president was responding to recent threats from North Korean leader Kim Jong-un.
He has disrespected our country greatly. He has said things that are horrific. And with me, he's not getting away with it. He got away with it for a long time between him and his family. He's not getting away with it. It's a whole new ballgame.
The president made his comments following a security briefing with top advisors, just days after the Trump administration officially notified the United Nations of plans to exit the Paris Climate Accord. The government's leading science agency released a report that demonstrates global warming is real and getting worse. Prepared by nearly 500 scientists from around the world, the report shows last year's average global temperatures were the highest on record. In Venezuela, a fifth opposition mayor was removed from his post and ordered under arrest in a continuing crackdown on President Nicolas Maduro's adversaries. Meantime, the president of the Mayors Association of Venezuela told a press conference in Caracas, quote, "None of us is afraid of persecution." Pakistan's deposed prime minister criticized the country's Supreme Court judges for disqualifying him from office. Nawaz Sharif, who reluctantly stepped down last month, says he was voted into office and his removal was an insult to millions. Sharif embarked on an on-the-road rally from Islamabad to his hometown of Lahore to gather support. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. here in New York, 7:30 Friday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, we are braced for a slide around the Asia Pacific today. Nikkei futures looking sharply lower, as are ASX futures off by more than 1% right now. We'll be keeping an eye on National Australia Bank later on. One of the big four reporting a third quarter trading update today. We're expected to see a $1.6 billion profit there. We'll also be watching the Australian dollar, which much to the joy of the Reserve Bank of Australia has been easing off a little lately. The Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe will be testifying to lawmakers a little later this morning for a grueling marathon 3-hour session. Also watching Noble Group out of Singapore reporting a $1.75 billion loss in the second quarter. Net debt surging to almost $4 billion. So that's going to be an interesting day for Noble Group. And elsewhere in Singapore, we'll be watching Singtel earnings at the open. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde, in for Emily Chang. Now, Google CEO Sundar Pichai is set to hold a town hall meeting with all Google employees on Thursday. The main point of discussion, a recent diversity memo written by fired Google engineer James Damore. Now, Damore caused an uproar in Silicon Valley after he authored an internal 10-page memo asserting that there are biological causes behind gender inequality in the tech industry. Bloomberg's Emily Chang spoke with James Damore in a broadcast exclusive. She started by asking, well, if you had any regrets about releasing that controversial memo.
It's hard to regret it just because I do believe that I'm trying to make Google and the world in general a better place by not confining us to our ideological echo chambers where only one side of the story can be heard and it's totally intolerant to other viewpoints and even scientific evidence.
What scientific evidence are you talking about? Because in the follow-up to your piece, there have been plenty of discussion about this, and discussion about the fact that there is no research to support this idea that there are biological causes for the lack of women in tech or the lack of women in leadership positions. I spoke to Megan Smith, who worked at Google, who was the former CTO for the United States, and she said that this is a myth.
Among psychologists, there's a consensus that prenatal testosterone does affect a lot of personality traits, and in particular, one's interest in people versus things. And I'm not saying that all men are different than all women, just that there's a distribution of these personality traits, and that distribution differs between men and women. And so there are very many capable women at Google, and I'm not trying to say that any of them are any worse than average male engineer at Google. Just, I was trying to address why we don't have equal representation from the population.
Susan Wojcicki wrote a very impassioned response to this, and she said that your memo, had it been about Black people or Latinos or the LGBT community, that you wouldn't have anyone defending you. How do you respond to that?
So I think that that's just a false analogy, and she's trying to lump me in with racists and other bigots, which I'm not. I'm not a sexist, and I'm not a racist. So I think that that's just trying to smear my image rather than actually looking at the evidence. Very little of the responses have been actually looking at the science. They've just been calling me names or nitpicks of, oh, the formatting was a little wrong, or the original leak document that someone else leaked didn't have any citations when my original document did.
You're arguing for ideological diversity and ideological inclusion. Don't you think that extends to women and minorities and all kinds of people? Google is making products for the world. Don't you need to have all kinds of people making those products?
So, yes, I support diversity and inclusion. And I think that also our lack of ideological diversity has actually hurt our project or our products, and it makes us think that, for example, just the stereotype that all conservatives are stupid, for example, that is widely held within very left-leaning circles, and that has hurt us. It makes us alienate large portions of the population.
That was former Google engineer James Damore speaking exclusively to Bloomberg's Emily Chang. And Google CEO Sundar Pichai has also issued a statement. He says, "Our job is to build great products for users that make a difference in their lives. To suggest a group of our colleagues have traits that make them less biologically suited to that work is offensive and not okay." Joining now for a deeper look from San Francisco is Bloomberg Technology's Ellen Hewitt, who's been reporting on this story and diversity at large. And Ellen, talk to us about the town hall meeting that Sundar Pichai is going to be holding with all of Google later today. I mean, is this a rare occurrence, and what do you think he wants to achieve by it?
Well, the town hall meeting is the TGIF, which is a weekly Google meeting that usually took place on Fridays. That's why it's called TGIF, but they switched it to Thursdays a while ago. But it will be, I think, a hotly watched TGIF. I know, I've talked to sources within Google who are not in Mountain View, and they say they're going to dial in. They're really interested to hear what Sundar has to say about this memo. The CEO, he cut his vacation short in order to return in time to address the company about this. And ahead of time, you can see Googlers internally vote for questions that they want to be addressed at the meeting. And what it seems like they're very interested in is, how can we make sure that we make Google a place that feels comfortable for everyone? And then also, how can we make sure that it's a place where employees feel like they can express their views without getting fired, which is a concern that Mr. Damore had originally brought up in his memo.
Interesting. So do you think there might be some way sort of issuing an easing of concerns to those who might be of a conservative persuasion working in Google? Because it's not just been brought up by James Damore, but actually at the shareholder meeting back in, was it June or earlier this year, a shareholder brought up the fact that they felt perhaps conservatives aren't welcomed by Google.
Yeah, if you talk to people who are supporters of James Damore, and, he said the same thing in his memo and in interviews afterward, there's this idea that there's sort of a silent minority of conservatives who really don't feel safe speaking up about their political points of view because it's not really a commonly held belief at Google. And you're right, it totally has implications for how Google is viewed. And Silicon Valley, very large, powerful Silicon Valley companies tend to lean left. And that has had effects in the way that they've, had to deal with, Facebook has had to deal with allegations that they suppress conservative content. This extends a little bit farther than just this one engineer and his time at Google.
Has anyone spoken out in support within Google for James Damore?
I think there's this idea, or, actually he said yesterday in his interview with Emily that to speak up in support of him inside Google would be, quote unquote, career suicide. So while he says that there are many people who have sent him private messages of support, I think it is probably less likely that those people are posting internally publicly. So there's a lot of internal message boards within Google that employees can look at, and my understanding is a lot of them have had messages that are not in support of him, but he says that there are many people who have expressed to him privately that they agree with some or many of the things that he put forth.
And what about the legal action that he mentioned as well in his interview? We understand that he's already filed a charge with the National Labour Relations Board regarding protection versus employer retaliation. Where do we stand with that?
So the NLRB charge is very new. It was filed on Monday, but he did tell Emily that he is planning to pursue legal action. We don't know, and he wouldn't clarify whether that is the NLRB charge or maybe a wrongful termination lawsuit. I think it will just have to remain to be seen. It's only been a few days since he was fired. We know that he also did meet with Human Resources several times the week before the memo was published, apparently to bring up some of his concerns about what he saw as illegal hiring practices within Google. This is also one of the sort of arguments he's been making both before and after the publication, or before and after he was fired.
A great interview by Emily, great reporting by yourself, and I know you'll continue to stick with this story. Bloomberg Technology reporter Ellen Hewitt, thank you for joining us. Now, switching gears, and Coinbase has received a $100 million investment from a group led by the venture capital firm IVP. The move comes amid a delicate time for the digital currency exchange. In just the past 2 months, it suffered a trading crash and upset customers over how it handled the recent Bitcoin fork. Now, Coinbase plans to use the money to expand its engineering and customer support staff and is aiming to open a New York office for its professional trading platform, GDAX. Now, coming up, SoftBank continues its recent spending spree. We look at the latest wide-ranging investments by Masayoshi Son's Vision Fund. And we continue to monitor Snap's earnings call for you. Despite pressure on the shares, CEO Evan Spiegel says, well, he will not be selling his this year. Take a listen.
Given the amount of speculation around the lockup expiration, I feel it is important to note that Bobby and I will not sell any of our shares this year. The company will withhold the shares needed to satisfy RSU tax withholding obligations. We believe deeply in the long-term success of Snap.
Now, SoftBank's Vision Fund is continuing its recent spending spree, said to be investing nearly $2.5 billion in Indian e-commerce giant Flipkart. Now, the deal gives Flipkart nearly $4 billion, therefore, in cash to match Amazon's vow to spend $5 billion in India, where e-commerce is expected to grow at 30% each year for the next 5 years. Meanwhile, the investment fund started by SoftBank CEO Masayoshi Son isn't stopping there. Vision Fund also led an investment round in Roivant Sciences, which is European-based, and said that it's also in late-stage talks regarding a major investment in drug discovery startup Benevolent AI. Joining me now from San Francisco to discuss is Bloomberg's Technologies Executive Editor, Tom Giles. Tom, great to see you. And
great to
fascinating,
see you.
Particularly. Let's focus on India first, because Flipkart, I mean, it's interesting because already Masayoshi Son had an investment in the rival Snap deal. He wanted to merge them together. It didn't come off. So now he's gone full guns a-blazing and the #1 investor in Flipkart now.
Where will Masayoshi Son end his investments? He's everywhere, seemingly both geographically and industry-wise. To home in on the India question, you're right. He did try to orchestrate some kind of a merger between these two rivals. The better to fend off the Amazon threat, which seems to be very real and also ubiquitous, much like the SoftBank Vision Fund. That didn't pan out, so the next best thing is to invest the capital in both of the companies so that they have at least a fighting chance against this war chest that Amazon has. You know, it's a big market, 500 million people. E-commerce is really taking off in India in all kinds of ways. So better to invest in two different rivals than have Amazon really kind of take the one you have that you are invested in and really tear it apart and not give help to the other one.
I mean, he's got a bit of a reputation for having fended off against Amazon. He was one of the first investors in Alibaba. That's where they made significant returns. But what's so amazing about the Vision Fund and about Masayoshi Son is, as you say, the sheer breadth of this investment. When you're looking at what ride sharing they've got into across several countries, they've also got into chip making, they've got into e-commerce, you name it. They've made some big investments in it. We can just see Nvidia, $4.3 billion, and Didi, we saw $5 billion. Where else are they looking? Because interestingly, closer to home here in Europe, they are looking at potentially a little bit of farmer action.
Right, exactly. So what they're doing is, one of them is Roivant, as you mentioned, also in talks. We understand with another company called Benevolent AI. What these do is they use machine learning, artificial intelligence to help root out new drugs, new ways of fighting disease, using the machines, as it were, to speed up drug discovery. This is an emerging area. This is an area that has proved of interest to the likes of Gates. So it's one that has definitely caught a lot of people's eye. We've talked to people close to the Vision Fund who told us that you're going to see them really bulk up their staffing. They're going to be adding people who can help them understand this field a lot better. It's not my area of expertise, I know that for sure, but it's one that the Vision Fund, certainly with these two investments, this one investment that's been announced and this one potential investment, are areas that they could get into this new emerging area.
And we know Masayoshi Son has such ambitions. He said he wants to be the biggest investor in tech in the world. We've just heard earlier this week at the earnings conference that he was talking about getting into Lyft and indeed into Uber or whoever might be in the ride-sharing behemoths in the US. Is there any way you can paint a picture for what the vision is of the Vision Fund? To be in everything and anything?
There's a running joke that, I mean, every deal we hear about, every time we hear there's scuttlebutt about a potential investment or this startup looking to raise funds or find a strategic partner, the next question immediately becomes, well, have they talked to Vision Fund, or where's Vision Fund in all of this? They do seem to have their fingerprints on every deal, or the rumors of their fingerprints on every deal. Multiple industries, it's a lot of money. My question on the Uber Lyft, by the way, is exactly can you get into Uber at a lower valuation? This is a company, this is the most valuable company startup in the world, essentially, and what we'd heard was that they might come in at a lower valuation than they're already in. Remember that part of the Vision Fund is some Saudi investors who already have a piece of Uber at a much higher valuation. Do you want to have your partner come in and sort of undercut your existing investment at a lower valuation? So that one could be a little complicated, a little tricky. Definitely, you're going to see the Vision Fund across many more industries and many more geographies.
Fascinating. They've certainly been making some big bets here in Europe with the likes of Improbable, for example. So this is worldwide. Bloomberg Technologies Executive Editor Tom Giles, great to get your take on all of it. Thank you. Now, coming up, users have been flocking to videos on Facebook. Now the social media giant is working on having even more eyeballs on the platform. How, you ask? We'll discuss. This is Bloomberg. Now, the amount of videos on Facebook has exploded over the last few years, giving the social media giant a whole new way to bring in ad dollars. And now the company is attempting to gain even more viewers with the launch of its new video platform. Here with more details, Bloomberg's Technology's Sarah Fry, who covers the company for us. And Sarah, quite fascinating. Talk to us about the hub that is Watch.
So Watch is Facebook's attempt to get its users to talk about these videos as they occur. They're more episodic content, like short video content, the likes of which you might also find on YouTube. And some of it is more reality TV. Some of it is more exploratory, like there's a whole series where people go to try to taste the best cheese in the world. So what they're really hoping that people will do is, in this Watch section, look at these videos, recommend them to their friends, comment about them as they're happening, and then come back and back again as the next episode show.
I mean, is this aimed at millennials? Is it Vice that should be worried? Who is the competition here? Is it Amazon, Netflix, YouTube?
I mean, from what we see in the market right now, it definitely seems like it's YouTube. It's very similar in terms of the social aspect of it. Of course, on Facebook, they say that they're set apart by the fact that your whole social network is on Facebook, whereas on YouTube it might be more of a fan base thing. But yeah, this is definitely more of the internet style content as opposed to what we've seen from Netflix and the like. And it is partners like Vice and like A&E and the sports teams and everyone who's coming to Facebook to make this content and then hopefully make some money off it. They've gathered a lot of influencers and other creators who can come and make content for Facebook and then share revenue on the ads they sell and make money off of branding that content through sponsors.
Now, I've got to ask you, while you're there, you cover Facebook, you also cover Snap. And interestingly, Snap itself has been pushing into video, in particular aimed at millennials. They had what Good Luck America as one of their first original programming.
Right.
Talk to us about the push there for Snap. Has it been working at all?
Snap is very intensely focused on making this kind of episodic video that is mobile first. So they want their videos to be shot in vertical format. They want them to be, short and sweet. The way that we would watch a movie trailer on TV is totally different from the way it should show up on Snap. So what they're trying to do is kind of reinvent how we view TV on the phones. Whereas this Facebook effort, they have this available on mobile, but also on desktop, on all browsers, and on their TV app that they have connected to TV.
Maybe a little bit easier to woo in there for the makers of the content. Lastly, I'm looking at Snap, down 17% after hours. Anything come out on the call that really struck you as the reporter on it?
Well, the call's been very interesting. Evan went through a lot of great stats on the user base engagement. So even if the user base isn't growing, I was interested to hear that on average people send 20 snaps a day. That seems like a lot to me, more than during the IPO. And then some other facts. Evan and his co-founder Bobby Murphy are not planning to sell any of their shares this year.
Fascinating. Meanwhile, we'll see who else exits as the lockup periods come to an end. As I say, currently down 17% after hours. Thank you very much indeed, Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer. Now that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. A reminder that we are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out. It's at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. San Francisco, 10 p.m. right here in London. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.